like to call our meeting to order. Thank all you folks for coming. When we get to it, it'll be an open discussion between boards, so just, you don't have to raise your hand, but we're gonna go back and forth. It's not like just us, it's all of us, okay? When we discuss the bylaw, it's a little informal.
We're not here as a board.
No, it's just informal, but right. So it's more of an informal conversation. Okay. First thing on tonight's agenda is the minutes from August 8th. We all set?
Recommend approval of the minutes of August 8, 2017, as printed.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None? Very good. Approval not required. I don't see any plans, do we?
There are none tonight.
Okay.
Public.
Okay. The next thing is the planning board discussion.
You forgot
Public.
Public comments. Oh. We have a public comment section. If there's something that you would like to discuss that's not on our agenda, anyone from the public is open to speak of it? Anything they like? Anybody? We'll move along. Now it's planning board discussion. Zoning bylaw updates. Report with overview by Bob Mitchell. That must be you.
It must be.
Yes. I think because we're on television and recording, we'd actually like you to come up and speak on the mic, if you don't mind doing that. That way the people at home could hear you.
Hi, I'm Bob Mitchell, and good evening to you all. Nice to be here. Start talking about some details related to the zoning project. As you know, myself and Bob Ritchie, who's one of the leading land use attorneys in the state, were hired by the town to look into your zoning bylaw and do an assessment of it and do a diagnostic of it and talk to people in the town and town hall about, I want to turn my backs to you, but various issues that are seen as some problems with the bylaw, and then as part of that to recommend a recodification, which is not a rewrite of the entire bylaw. Recodification is really trying to reorganize the bylaw into a better format, a more usable format, a more logical and rational format that people can use. As in all bylaws, they have their quirks, and people who have been using a particular bylaw, no matter how quirky, if they've been using it for many years, they've kind of figured out all the quirks and know how to use it. So this effort is more addressed to people who don't use it on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis, but the people that try to need it on occasion, or some of the property owners or builders or attorneys, and even the town hall staff, and I'm sure the boards as well. You probably know some problems with the bylaw that you have to deal with on a regular basis. So we're doing an assessment of all of that, and as part of the recodification, this is kind of a recodification plus project. So the town, in its request for proposals, asked for us to come up with a new framework of the bylaw and help the town recodify it into that better organized structure, more consistent structure. But then also to look in more depth at the definition section, and to look in more depth and make some recommendations about the uses in the bylaw and how they're structured and what uses are in the bylaw, and how easy or not people can find what use is where and what use is allowed and not allowed. So the first step we did, well, not the first step, the first step was we spent a number of months here interviewing various people, and we did present a report. I hope everybody on the two boards got the report, which was a summary of all our interviews and the kinds of things that we heard. Hard to find things in the bylaw, inconsistent language, things are not in logical order, The same kinds of topics are kind of scattered around the bylaw. They're not aggregated together. Things are missing. It's not up to date with state statute changes and/or court cases. The kinds of things we actually hear pretty much all the time when we go into towns to do this kind of project, you know, so bring it up to date, kind of. And based on that, and we proposed a new framework for the bylaw, which we had submitted probably back in May now, and we got the okay with that. And at that same time, we proposed a framework for the definitions section as well. And we actually gave you a couple of options, and you chose one. So, and we followed that. So there are, I'm not sure what, you have the handouts for this, the one that is a track changes version. Is that what you have? And then there's also a version, sort of a PDF version, which accepts all the track changes just for tonight, so you have a clean version. Do they have that?
Yep.
Yeah. Just so you could see the clean version. Now, a couple of things about this. This is the first draft of the definition section. There'll be more drafts. We're just kind of unveiling this tonight to start the conversation with the town and the boards and the staff, and I'm going to talk about that in a little more depth because we could really use all of your help as we go into this a little more deeply. So this draft primarily, if you looked at it, primarily just takes your existing definitions, wherever they are in the bylaw, and creates this new style, if you will. We added some introductory language. We did tweak some of the definitions where it was kind of an easy tweak, where we found, when I say we, Bob Ritchie, who's the other person involved, there were a couple of places where we didn't understand exactly what the definition was supposed to be saying. So we checked back in with Brian and the rest of the staff, and fortunately, no, Brian, you know, and fortunately somebody in town hall said, oh, well, that's supposed to mean this. And so, well, in one instance, we said that's not actually how it's written. So we kind of rewrote a few things just to hopefully clarify it. There was a couple of places where it was just a really long single paragraph, which is one of the first things you look for when you're trying to rewrite and update a bylaw is look for long paragraphs and look for really long sentences and do something about them. Because, you know, it's really hard for people to wade through long versions of word after. I think we had one sentence in there we found had like 120 words in it or something like that. You don't want to have that. So when I discovered that it actually had two different topics within the same definition, so I just broke it into two paragraphs. Something simple like that. There's a couple of new definitions. There's a definition the zoning board asked to be added. Now, I can't remember where it is, but it's in here, and it says, and in the comment section, it says recommended by the zoning board. Added at the recommendation of the nuisance. Put a definition in there about nuisance. So that's a draft proposed definition, and it would certainly like to get more recommendations from both boards in terms of that. Now, the other thing that we had proposed, and you will see here, is aggregating terms that are basically the same topic. One of the things you see in bylaws, for those of us that read bylaws all the time, is this total disaggregation of the same topic in definition sections. So you'll see, like under F, fast food restaurant. Then under R, restaurant, class 1. Then under T, takeout restaurant. Well, if somebody wants to know how you define restaurants, they got to wander through the whole definition section. Or yards, that's another one we see, you know, F, front yard. S, side yard. Then all of a sudden you're down to Y, yard, comma, back, rear. Well, you know, it's not even consistent in terms of how they put it in the definition section. So it's all yards, so aggregate them. And we had given you, as part of our framework, some ideas about how to aggregate these. And this is the result of the option you picked. Now, one of the things about zoning bylaws, and when, you know, communities decide they need to update, fix, whatever their zoning bylaws, you always hear the same kinds of things. Make it more user-friendly, make it easier to navigate, make it easier for people to understand sort of the flow and the rhythm of a zoning bylaw, how to get through it. And in doing that, there's sort of the substantive side of things, you know, what are the words, how are the words written? Are they written correctly? Are you using the right terms to mean what you think you mean? But there's also visual cues that help people navigate a bylaw. What are the visual cues? Well, there's a whole variety of different visual cues. And one is to do the best either through fonts, the types of fonts, the size of fonts, the use of things like bolding or small caps or italics to make people understand and quickly visualize the difference between what is a major heading, an article heading or a section heading, what is a subsection under that, what is a subsection. You know, so they see right away there's some hierarchy here, and this language that's indented here is a subsection of this heading. This language that's indented here is a subsection of the heading above it, of the subheading above it. So people can follow, people understand when you start indenting, then that language belongs to what's right above it, et cetera, et cetera. So the type of fonts, whether you're bold or to make a distinction between different headings at whatever level you're at is one of the visual cues, multiple kinds of visual cues, the size of fonts. And that really needs to be thought about in terms of helping people, without even reading it, just kind of starting to understand how things are laid out and how they can follow the sequence of information before you even get into the information. Now, one of the things that has become somewhat more common, it's not all that common yet, is the use of color. And myself and my project partner really are a believer in color in terms of helping people navigate and to see the visual cues. For a couple of things. One is, if you are actually looking at the document in color, it's a very quick indicator of where you are and what's a major heading. In this case, you can see Article 3 definitions is a blue heading. Our proposal, and you will see this when we come back with drafts of the other sections, is when we set out the framework, we had like administration and enforcement and definitions, and use regulations, dimensional regulations, districts, special districts. Each one of these articles would have a different color. So people would know that blue, if you're in blue, you're in definitions. If you're in whatever, yellow, you're in the dimensional requirements. If you're in whatever color, so there's a color association that would be shown in the table of contents and then within the document itself. Again, another way to distinguish different sections from different sections and help people have a color visual cue as to where they are and where they should be. Now, I'm not sure how Falmouth does this, but increasingly towns don't provide printed copies of the zoning bylaw, or very many of them, because people increasingly don't get printed copies. They go on the town's website. and look at the bylaw there. So in that case, the color obviously is visible. If people print it out, then the color's not going to be visible. But we have designed it, and you might have a copy here. So if people print it out, if I have it, it is a shade of gray. So there's still some color distinction between places in the bylaw, even though it's not. Yeah, this is an example of the definition section, which is blue in color, but you can see there's a darker shade in the heading and a lighter shade in the definition section. I'll just turn this around. So this is what it looks like when it's just Xerox and it's not color. You still have those distinctions. The other thing about the bylaw online, that people more and more use it online, and we are proposing to do this, and we will do this, is to include hyperlinks. So if people need to, there's some information in whatever, Article 2, but there's some more information about that in Article 8, instead of having to flip the pages to get, or scroll down and scroll down, boom. You just click on the link, it takes you to Article 8, and there's a link there to take you back to where you were. Now again, that's for people using it electronically. And yes, sir?
Other than, I don't use the town's website, I just type in Code of Falmouth, go to the state provided thing, and it's all right there. Will these same colors show up on that format? The state publishes, I think, everybody's bylaws, and that's the one I find all the time. I'm just wondering, the color coding going to work on that site as well?
Well, that's a good question I don't have an answer to, but if the state is just taking it from the town's website link, it should. But I'm not sure how that, I mean, that's a question that we can all look at to see how that happens.
We can
Yeah.
check in with our GIS.
Do you know?
No, I had a question.
Oh, okay,
on color,
sure, okay.
Concern. Jerry Patamas, I am on the zoning board of appeals, but I'm speaking as an individual. I personally, and I think others might not like color, because to print it out at home, you can use a lot of expensive ink. The town won't print it in color because it gets expensive to print things in multicolor on the few copies they make. And I just don't think color as such is a good idea. I don't know if you wanted to go to cross-hashing. That would get people dizzy. The other thing is, I don't know if you could get into a definitional problem that if yellow is supposed to be dimensional and something else is yellow and it's not dimensional, how does that interact? Unless you'll keep us out of trouble on that.
Yeah, I'm not too concerned about that. You're right. I mean, if you don't want to print it out in color, you print it out in black and white, and I just had a piece, it comes out in black and white, but it
This is
still
black and white.
shows a
Terry, you
distinction.
wanna take this?
No, I've seen it. I didn't like it.
Okay.
So again, and then again, for people who don't use it electronically, they obviously aren't going to be able to use hyperlinks. And what we would do is, where we have a hyperlink, we would say, so again, this is all throwing sections out. You're in section 3, 240.2 or something, and there's some language there, and you need to see section 8, 252 or something like that. We'd have a hyperlink there, but we'd also have a language that would say, for more information, something like, for more information, see section 8, Article 8, section 252. So if you just got it printed in a printed copy, you can't hyperlink it, but you would still see where you need to go to find additional. So we're trying to design this for people that use it as paper and people that use it in electronic form, which more and more people do, but I know not everybody does.
Yes, Pat?
There's another problem, Jerry, that you didn't bring out too, is that there are a number of people who are colorblind,
Right.
and that would create a lot of havoc for them, I think.
Well, again, if they print it out in black and white,
Right.
it's black and white in shades of gray.
Yes? You get
I'm
two
still-
questions, Jerry, that's all.
No, I just wanted to go back, as he had mentioned, and this may be a legal question. If the Supreme Judicial Court in Massachusetts nullifies a particular section, bylaw, a definition, is my understanding, until we change that, it's still existing in our regulations. Is there such a thing, and sometimes you can go back and forth on this, that something is self-modifying based on judicial decision, let's say a Supreme Judicial decision, so it's not a question of if someone else is going to overturn it? And that might be more of a legal term.
If I understood you correctly, so the court decides that some definition is not legal.
Or some section.
Or some section or whatever, then it's not legal, but it's still in your bylaw. So it doesn't automatically disappear from your bylaw. The town meeting is the only body that can put words in and take words out of a zoning bylaw. So it would have to go back to town meeting for the 2/3 vote to take that section out or take that definition out or rewrite it in accordance with whatever court decision comes down. You'd probably have advice from your attorney saying, don't implement that or don't use that definition because the court said it's not a valid definition. It's still there, so you do want to put it on your top of your list of things to do to get out of the bylaw so there's not confusion down the road. But I've seen towns attempt to do that, and you can't sort of self-implement. Yeah. It would make some things easier, I presume, but it's town meeting is in control of the bylaw in that sense. So anyway, this is what we're proposing as a first draft, and how we're proposing to structure it. Now, some of the places on the track changes have some comments from us. Some of those are directed to the town where we either have a question or a comment that we would need some direction from the town, where, for example, building height on page 4, it starts out by saying, for community service uses and public buildings, building height is defined blah, blah, blah. Well, a use doesn't have a height. Buildings have, and structures have height, number one, and we didn't know what a community service use is because we couldn't find any definition of it. So maybe people know what that is, but it's heights are related to structures and buildings. So that's just a question, in terms of thinking about preciseness of language. Preciseness of language is critical. Yeah.
So something like building heights, it looks like something's missing. So I'll go back. Some words probably didn't get uploaded into the general code. So I do remember there was a distinction somewhere, but I'll have to go back and dig that up.
Okay.
And yes, uses do not have heights, but we've interpreted it over the years to structure.
So just another example is I know the town has moved the sign bylaw to the general bylaws, but there's still some sign definitions in the zoning bylaws, and so we just asked why. And, we don't need an answer tonight, but that's one of the questions that we have is to be defining something that's no longer in the bylaw, so.
Jerry?
Actually, there was a Cape Cod Times article today that piqued my curiosity when it said, is it the natural building height before anything was built? Is it the current, grade? Is it the current grade, which may not be the natural grade? And I'm assuming for all these, you should have a median height or something like that if it fluctuates.
Right, building height is one of those endless interpretation, reinterpretation arguments about how you measure it, from what grade, how you measure. The article, I read that article, they were going back to 1920 and trying to find the grade from 1920 to decide what the height is. where do you measure it to on the building? Is it the peak? Is it the mean level of the roof? What kind of roof? Is it, you know, a mansard or a gable or, so that's one of the key issues that we are as we go through the bylaw in detail, which we've been doing, we are both making some real notes about language that is not precise enough and that is vague. And that's the kind of place where towns get into trouble and end up in court and sometimes lose because you're not clear enough as to what you are trying to accomplish here, or you're using a word that you think you're using it this way, and the court says, no, just read it, I read it, you know, the court reads it, you're using it that way. Well, we didn't mean that, you know. So, I mean, I'll give you, just as a recent court case, I'll just pose a question. Is Dunkin' Donuts a restaurant, or is it a retail store?
Fast food.
Fast food, that's one answer.
A restaurant or a retail?
Is it a restaurant or a retail store?
Call it a bakery, that's for sure.
Bakery?
There are performance standards in the bylaw that regulate the classes of the restaurants.
What standards you have in the bylaw might
Performance
determine it?
standards, Section 240-113, performance standards that break down the criteria of what class each
Right,
restaurant is.
right. But for one community, their definitions were not clear. And in fact, this is a little flip because the community actually decided it was a retail store and approved it, and the neighbors didn't like it and sued saying it was a restaurant.
You know,
And the judge said, hey,
You know that-
the way your language is written, this is a retail store.
Right?
So preciseness of language is a critical thing as we go forward. And we will identify those places where we think you might need to rethink some of the writing here.
Yep.
Yeah, it was on Holly Park. The Dunkin' Donuts was interpreted to be a bakery. And that's why we went back over the years and redid the definitions back then.
In my experience in the
Yes, it
real
is, no,
estate
it's not.
field, I've seen our building commissioner tell people, well, if you start selling other products, we'll classify you a different way. So you go into a coffee shop and they sell coffee and cups and T-shirts and to change the class of the restaurant to make it fit the bylaw. So I see it all over the place. It's somewhat subjective to the person making the decision and what components they put into it. At least I've seen it practiced that way in our town.
It's a bakery, yes.
Bakery, I've seen that. We have several bakeries or places on Main Street that are not considered fast food.
It's always a thrill.
It's just French donuts instead of American donuts. But it's all
There's
bread.
there's that distinction between croissants and
Yeah.
real croissants.
So those are the kinds of issues that communities can, have difficulty with if they don't have precise definitions, or if the language of a particular section, the use language is not clear what you are trying to allow or not trying to allow. A lot of communities try to define every use that they can think of. So you see some bylaws that, still have the kind of the history of the community where they have saddle maker and tannery and things that, were going on 100 years ago, still being defined today, that
Ice house.
Ice House, that's another one, shows up a lot, but they don't have language for, nail salons or tattoo parlors or, yoga places. So there's a kind of a balance you really have to think about, because you're never going to define every potential use that's ever going to pop up. You can't foresee what uses would be in Falmouth in 10 years from now. So how do you address uses that are broad enough but specific enough to protect the community, but anticipating there's going to be new uses come along that the community needs to review have a provision for in some way. So we'll be looking at those kinds of things as well.
I would think one of the things we would hope to avoid would be almost spot zoning, where you don't allow a restaurant in a particular zone, but you allow a retail food store. I mean, I think it gets very confusing and very difficult unless you have it across the board that either the town doesn't allow any of them, or it's very specific to where it's allowed. I'm not sure I made myself
No,
clear.
I understand your point. I would just say, that's the reason why you have different zoning districts.
Right.
The purposes of the different zoning districts should be different, you know, and then the uses that are allowed within that district should somehow reflect the purpose of the district. And so it's perfectly appropriate that some districts might allow grocery stores and others not. Some business districts might allow a fast food restaurant and others not. That's not spot zoning. That's how zoning is structured and the purpose of districts, if I understood you correctly.
I think
Maybe not.
I didn't articulate it well.
Okay.
It's not your fault. If you had a Dunkin' Donuts in a light industrial district, and if you called it a restaurant, then I would assume you would have to be consistent with, you said Dunkin' Donuts, with that Dunkin' Donuts, regardless of where it was in town. So if it's a restaurant in one district, then it would have to be a restaurant in all districts, because I would think otherwise it would just be.
Okay. So that goes to the point that you had raised just earlier. Definition, definition, definition.
Have you taken a look at this table matrix we use for restaurants? Have you dived into that one yet?
I have looked at it, yes.
Because
I have looked at it.
that's going to be interesting.
We haven't gone into depth in looking at it, but it's critical. I mean, your point is one of the critical pieces, especially things like restaurants, because there's so many different kinds of restaurants. To define them in a way that gets you to where you want to be with a restaurant.
You
Where
need to
you
have
want
a
to allow.
calculator to work through ours and add the scores up. And then you should,
I
it'd
saw
be,
it.
before we get into that, we all should read that matrix and try to
I
understand it.
actually did and I didn't.
I've
I read it.
had to use it several times and I still don't know it.
Very confusing.
So that's, and we did hear that. We heard from people about how confusing certain sections of your bylaw is, and I think the restaurant calculation, we were told to look at that a few times by people. So we will, I mean, we've both looked at it, but we haven't gotten into depth. But, so yes, if you define our Dunkin' Donuts in some way, you know, restaurant, I don't know, you know, restaurant class 3, you know, mostly take out of,
Drive-through.
you know, just, I'm just throwing things out here, coffee and donuts and stuff like that, with a few seats is restaurant class 3, then if you allow a restaurant class 3 in an industrial zone or a restaurant class 3 in a business zone, and it's considered that Dunkin' Donuts meets that definition, then it's allowed in the industrial zone and you know, the business zone, however it's allowed, by special permit or site plan or by right or whatever. Yeah, that's a good point.
And then you have the drive-through issue, where you may have a Dunkin' Donuts or McDonald's, whatever, that's drive-through, and then a bank comes in and asks for a drive-through and is turned down because, for whatever reason, you don't have business drive-throughs. I mean, there are just so many intricacies. I looked at that matrix, and actually it made my head spin, so I put it down. But I know lots of communities have had to deal with those issues because a drive-through bank, now the big thing is the drive-through pharmacies.
Right.
And so I think we just have to be really careful of what we allow in what zones and for what reasons.
Yeah, I mean, there's two different ways of coming at that from most communities' way. One is to try to define every drive-through, every use that might have a drive-through, pharmacy, restaurant, liquor store, you know, you
Yeah.
know, Dunkin' Donuts,
Don't go-
whatever, and somehow try to craft regulations that are so specific to that particular use.
Right through Chapel.
And others are on the other side, and they look at the impacts of drive-through. Whoever's driving through for whatever purpose, what are the potential impacts? The
Right.
stacking of cars out onto roads.
Exactly.
The exit from the drive-through, how many drive-through windows are there? And then they regulate from that more global perspective, and if you happen to be a CVS or a McDonald's and you can meet these standards, a lot of communities usually make them go through a special permit process, but, you know, if you meet these standards and you get a permit, you can do it, and it doesn't matter whether you're McDonald's or Dunkin' Donuts. So there's different kind of philosophies about, zoning philosophies about drive-throughs, if you will. So,
That definition flowed from the McDonald's Cafe in Woods Hole. Remember that?
Yeah, oh, yeah.
McDonald's opened a cafe, wasn't it? So there's a lot of history we can get into, talk about over time.
As long as you don't have the golden arches, it's okay.
Oh,
And
there were
those-
tiny little, and the windows, you know, that flowed out of the debate of the McDonald's in Woods Hole, at the least side.
Franchise-free Woods Hole, Jerry, step back up.
This is more
This is
on the definitions, and it's something that's coming around now. And I think you say basically, if something is in Merriam-Webster's dictionary, that's the use all town boards should use.
it's one of the uses.
One of the uses.
Right.
Oh, state law, federal law.
Right.
I mean, one of the things that came up, and we don't have to discuss it now, would be something as different as what's manufacturing or what's process. Please don't speak to it tonight, but and maybe that's something that doesn't have to be in here, or maybe that's something that could be in here. One of the other things I noticed on nuisance, it refers to interference in the health and comfort. In my personal opinion, I don't think this board or the ZBA is in the position to determine public health. And when I looked up the definition of nuisance, it was close to this, but it was not this. It was sort of annoyance, headaches, public nuisance. I think this definitions of nuisance, especially when it includes health, could require it to be broader than necessary, or maybe that's what the board and town meeting wants, but it could get into a discussion at non-health boards.
Just answer that question, that language we actually got from the town. So, again, this is the first draft, so we can, modify it as people think it should be modified to do what it's supposed to say and people understand it. And then your first comment about manufacturing versus processing.
Yes.
You want to have definitions that make a distinction between those two? Is that what you're leading
If
to?
you think it's appropriate based on our bylaw,
Oh, okay,
well, where it might come into play.
okay.
And again, maybe the dictionary definition is adequate. No use putting in words that you don't need.
Well, when cases often end up in court and there's no definition in the bylaw, and the judges will often go to Webster's and say, well, what's the common use of this term? How is it commonly defined? And they'll go to a dictionary. Well, I don't know if it's always Webster's, but they'll go to a dictionary or something. So that's kind of a fallback position for defining things. So just wanted to let you know about sort of where we are with the other pieces of this. We have, based on your approval of the framework, we're starting to move the language, the existing language, from the existing bylaw into the new framework. Okay, just as is, as a first step. That's pretty labor intensive. You have a lot of language in your bylaw, and so we're moving it into the new framework. And once we do that, we'll show you that. So then you'll have, when we proposed the framework, it was sort of conceptual. We gave you the headings and the articles, but once we move the words in, you get to see, does this make sense? Does this section that we move from over here to up here make sense still? So that would be the first cut of that. And then as I said, we are making our notes of where we would recommend, we don't want to make recommendations of policy changes, because that's the town's decision. This is a recodification, not a rewrite of the whole bylaw, so, but sort of language changes, clarity changes, structural changes, punctuation changes. Lots of places get in trouble on commas. There was actually a work session this morning up in Boston among lawyers about how to write bylaws and legislation, and the big controversy was commas. Where to put them, where not to put them, when to use them, when not to use them. And somebody presented 3 recent cases, none of them were land use, but where a comma made a difference between who won and who lost. Either the comma was there, or it wasn't, it shouldn't have been there, or it wasn't there, and it should have been there. So we're looking at punctuation and those kinds of things. So we will start feeding you those, once we move the language over, we'll start feeding you the new format language. Yeah.
So I have another, when I was reading through the town bylaws and I was looking at the restaurant issues with the numeric designations of a rating of 199 or less as measured by the whatever, if 199 is an indicator of a specific type of restaurant that's allowed in, or whatever that class signifies, I think the less we have that people have to scratch their heads saying, okay, class 2 restaurant with a rating of 200 to 265, why can't it just be defined? I mean, why can't a class 2 restaurant be defined instead of having all these numerical, I mean, to simplify it for the layman, I think is really important. And I think it would save people just tremendous amounts of time and phone calls if you can go to a bylaw and you can read it, and you don't have to figure out what each of those subdivisions mean. So whatever the 199 or less is, just define it. I just think it's very difficult to read, and I'm not unfamiliar with bylaws, so if I'm not unfamiliar with them, double negative or whatever, then people who have never looked at a bylaw are going to rip their hair out.
So, as I said, this is, what you have in front of you is the existing language for the most part. And so this is the kind of feedback we would be looking for. Something of that magnitude is, we could do that, but that's a policy issue first. And that's something that the town, whoever the town, I'm sure the planning board and zoning board and whoever else would need to come to some consensus about to give us direction. And if we get direction to look into it and propose some definitions, we could do that. But to us, that would not be recodification. That would be something more substantial than recodification. And so basically asking you, or the town, if that's a discussion you should have among yourselves to give us direction, then we'd be happy to listen to it. And
First things first.
but
Yeah.
First things first.
and yeah, I mean, Brian, maybe you could speak to this. This is kind of a phase 1
Right, first things.
recodification, and a lot of things that come up in phase 1, we're going to say, this is kind of a substantive issue, this is kind of a policy issue. That's probably better in phase 2 and not in a recodification.
You can move from one class of restaurant to another just by changing the type of service, the plates you use, whether you wash them or use paper. I mean, that's the way, and I've watched our building commissioners in the past move them around. So if you don't make it one way, all you do is change something, and you make it, we'll deal with it later.
Right, in other words, first things first.
Right.
Let's get this thing restructured, so at least what we have in the stew, whatever ingredients we have in the stew, we know what they are.
Right.
If we want to change the ingredients later on, that's step number 139. We're back here on number 15. But points well taken, plus some history, how difficult it is to actually define when there are a zillion variations of restaurants. What are you really trying to do? You're really trying to control the impacts, solid waste, traffic. I remember Rich talking about air pollution, the stacking lanes and all the cars belching smoke. So that's really what you're trying to get at. Not so much, a zillion types of definitions out there. But that's step number, we're heading in that direction, but let's get the first things first.
Jerry?
I guess I'm still at step 2 because I'm more concentrating on the definitions. And it was interesting that this public outreach area under wind energy systems, which I can understand given the past history why it's there, but maybe there should be a more consistent public outreach area. I mean, and it's the existing bylaw, I guess we say 300 to 1,500 feet, and it's probably based on the height of the turbine or something like that. We just don't say 500 feet or 1,000 feet. Any public outreach for special permit or whatever, it's a set distance. And you board or consultants can figure out what that proper distance might be. The other thing is, under wind energy systems, I would suggest you change that definition to energy systems related terms and move the definition of photovoltaic cell to underneath there, because now it's hanging someplace else, and I'm not sure it needs to be moved. In my own personal view, some of these definitions under wind are standard technical terms that probably don't belong in here and could be changed, but some of them won't be. And I'll give you an example. Ambient sound level, broadband sound, flicker, met tower, net metering, pure tone side. Those, God forbid if someone ever changes those definitions. System height, I could see where you may want to look at that. You're looking at one type of wind turbine, but if you're looking at a conical height, a conical wind turbine, it might be something different. And I also noticed you don't have a definition, and maybe we don't want to, but it's probably coming, aquatic turbine or water turbine, where someone may try to generate electricity from current within the stream or tides. I think that's probably most of my comments.
So, can I comment on Jerry?
Sure.
Okay, what I'm understanding you to say, Jerry, is to do away with wind and make it an energy system
Right.
definition category that can take into account all of the current types of energy systems and those that we have yet to have.
See, yes, solar voltaic. I mean, we might not have standards for it, but at least it's a grouping for future placement.
And we're gonna have a house for it to put
How-
those
yeah,
into.
yeah, that's.
Okay.
Yeah, there are any number of emerging technologies, especially
Yeah,
in the
things
energy
are changing all
business.
the
Fuel storage used to be storage of oil or coal or whatever. Now we have these very huge, large lithium batteries.
Right.
Plants coming in that essentially take power from the grid and store it overnight. It's neither fish nor fowl. Again, that's
Further,
phase,
yeah.
phase 2, but something we've noted down here.
Yes.
Good evening. My name is Terrence Hurry. I'm the Vice Chair of the ZBA, although my comments tonight are made in my individual capacity. I want to first thank the Planning Board for inviting the ZBA here tonight. I think we're off to a great start with the definitions, and I also want to thank Bob for coming down and giving his presentation. And just the last few comments that we've been making, it's off in the future, it's on step 200, whatever it might be. My question to Bob is if you can maybe give us a timeline as to what we're looking at with definitions, and you hinted at a few steps down the line in terms of what we're going to be looking at soon.
Right, okay, I can do that, thank you. So timelines, there's multiple timelines going on here because we're doing multiple things in parallel, but not always in sync. So the definitions, this is draft 1. We would expect to have draft 2 probably by no later than mid-September. Now, that's going to be based on our recommendations. We really want it to also be based on your recommendations, and some of what you've said tonight, Jerry, has been helpful. But we need to get, as I mentioned earlier, specifics. A lot of the comments we got originally were, as I think I might have mentioned, the definition section needs work. Things are vague. There's things missing. Okay, could you be more specific? So the more the town staff and the boards could give us specifics, the more we could put them into the next draft. And so that's one. The second thing is, I mentioned, we're moving all the language, the existing language, into the new framework. That's a lot of work. It's also a lot of words, and what we're thinking of doing is, so we don't overwhelm everybody, that we would take maybe the first 3 or 4 articles that we move the language over and bring it to you, so you could at least see how it's looking, how it's formatted, how things, you know, we would give you like a, what we call a crosswalk. This section came from the old bylaw, section such and such. It's now in the new bylaw in this section. So you would be able to follow where it came from and where it landed. So if we just gave you, 3 or 4 articles, you'd be able to look at that without looking at an entire bylaw of some, I don't know how many pages you have in your bylaw, but it's a lot. So we don't get too far down the road and get off the track. And that would be sort of a pilot that you could all look at and then give us feedback on that. And so I don't have a great estimate now because it is taking a lot of labor to move all that over, but I would say sometime probably in October we would have that. The other thing that we're doing, as I mentioned, the zoning diagnostic. We've now both gone through the whole bylaw and have all our notes. Now I'm going to start collating the notes into a coherent report to the town on the diagnostic of what we found. That will probably be, I would say, that would be in October as well. And then certainly before the end of the year, we would have the whole language moved over, and we would hope that we would have started, we would be working on draft 2 of that after working with all of you on draft 1. And again, this is kind of a filtering process. We're starting way out here, and we're trying to filter down to get to where you're all comfortable in terms of what language you actually are going to change, what language you're going to delete, and what language you're going to add to the new bylaw. I mean, there are some sections of the bylaw that have been identified to us that no longer are valid. And so what you mentioned the self-extinguishing kind of routine. Well, we can't do that, but there's some pieces in the bylaw that are already in that situation where they don't have any validity and they're not used, so this is the time to recommend deletion of them. So that's what we're trying to get to. So I think, by the end of the year, we were hoping to be on draft 2 of all of that, so that we're getting closer and closer to a final draft that you're comfortable with, going to a public hearing at some point.
Yeah, that was going to be my question. When will we be taking the first part of this to town meeting? When would you see that?
I think we had discussed at this November town meeting an Article 2 report to the town meeting, stand by, this is what we're doing, this is where we are, and that you might see something for the April town meeting next year, be the very earliest, more than likely a year from now.
A year from now, okay.
Because you're going to want to have hearings, you're
Yeah.
going to want to take your time and do it right. But you might be able to take a lot of cleanup stuff, the dead wood that's in the bylaw that we just want to jettison.
Yeah.
More than likely, you're looking at April of 18. More substantive things, you're going to want to take your time.
You mean November of 18?
Yes.
I know. I'm going to have to get a room down here.
Oh, I didn't tell you that, but, oh, gee, I mentioned Let's go mention that. But some of the deadwood for sure, things that we know we're going to remove from the bylaw that aren't used, have been used for 25 years. Those will clean up things you could see neat. But yeah, you're probably looking at November 8th.
We would like to, I would say we, the consultant, would like to be done writing this long before November of 2018.
Oh, yeah, but their work will be done. Your work is just beginning.
So, we're, by the beginning of the summer or the end of the spring next year, we would hope and expect that we'd have, draft 2, draft 3, and final draft, where you're comfortable taking it forward on your own.
Because the warrant for April's town meeting closes in early January. So, yeah, that's not a lot of time.
Yeah, I mean, even though it's a recodification, recodification takes a lot of work to make sure you get the right language and right structure, so that when you start changing it substantively, you actually change it in a way that doesn't start messing up the bylaw all over again. And so you don't have to hire other consultants 10 years from now because people can't find their way through the bylaw and can't understand the language and all of that. You want to avoid that long-term goal here. So more time up front, we think, saves time and money at the back end.
Okay. Very good.
Well, thank you all.
Thank you,
And
Bob. Yeah.
again, if
We'll be in touch.
homework assignment, specifics.
Right.
You can give us specifics. If you could, I
So
don't
if you
get
could-
some of what you just said to get
Right,
it
so
to
if
Brian,
the
that would
board
be very
members- The
helpful.
board members could just funnel all your comments.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, you should send them to us, and then we send them.
And I send
I'll send them to you.
No, if the planning board members could just funnel your comments to Melinda, if the zoning board members want to funnel their comments to Sari, then we can combine them up and get them to Bob. Okay? That way we don't all over.
Yeah, they should go through your folks.
Right. And off we'll go. I know.
Any other questions?
You look
You all satisfied so far with our direction?
Yeah.
Looking good, Paul?
It's a good
Very
start.
Good stuff. Thank you, Bob.
Sorely needed.
Yeah.
Thank
Are you
you.
finding that, starting with the definitions, you've had a lot of experience on this, helps pinpoint questionable areas too? I'm sorry, I should have asked that while you were still up there.
I have one more question.
Definitely, yes.
Okay.
I recommend all the time start with the definitions, because that really identifies what's missing, what terms you have in the bylaw that need to be defined and aren't, what's missing, what language you already have in the definitions that's vague and people can't figure out what it's supposed to mean. So that's one of the building blocks of the foundation of a good bylaw, is a great definition section.
Do you find that when you finish, the bylaw gets longer or shorter? Or there's a neutral?
It tends to be neutral. I've seen both longer and shorter. Longer is usually a town that hasn't updated the bylaw in years and, is really trying to catch up into the 21st century. The bylaw is kind of almost in the 19th century for some towns. So getting it up to the 21st, they're going to add a lot. But, so I think it's probably closer to neutral. We'll see how it falls out here once we've kind of moved all the language over and we can start looking at what we can delete, what we can tweak, and what's missing. That's the key part. What's missing and needs to be added. Now, if you go down to like 7 font, it gets very short. Nobody can read it, but it's shorter. We aren't going to do that.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you all.
Looking forward to the progress.
Great.
We have some interesting stuff, guys. I'm sorry, if you want to stay and listen, you don't have to leave. I'm kidding.
And we'd like to.
Hi. Good to see you again. Thanks. Thank you.
I just had a,
Thank you all for coming.
Go ahead.
It makes it easier for us.
as I'm looking through these definitions, because this whole accessory apartment thing is making me crazy, a semi-detached house, a one-family house built together at the same time and separated by a fireproof division with no openings. Why couldn't that be the same as a house that has a finished basement with a firewall between the basement and the first floor? It is not a multifamily house. It's merely a semi-detached
What-
house.
What definition are you looking at?
I'm looking at the definition on page 14.
Because semi-detached,
I know what you think of when you think of a traditional semi-detached
It's a
house
two-family.
as a house that's attached side by side. But
with
there,
living space.
but there is nothing here that says side by side. It says two one-family houses built together at the same time and separated by a fireproof division with no openings.
Okay, but this is not the accessory apartment bylaw. This is just a
Jim.
definition.
I understand that.
Okay.
But when people are going and being told that that apartment would make it a multifamily dwelling, and they need the AI system, which is what is happening now, I'm looking for a way to find a legal definition for an accessory apartment that doesn't necessitate an AI. And this, to me, could fit that definition.
But if you read our business zones, a semi-detached residential use is allowed in business zones all the time. It has, so you could change that, and you might mess up the impact. A residential use is accepted in a B2 zone, a B3, and it's a by right use without a special permit to put a semi-detached in a business zone. So you can have a small business lot, and you could put a semi-detached two-family on it right now by right.
So there are no.
Or the same thing in business, what is it, general business. I built 3 of them. You could put in a semi-detached house by right. You don't have to go to get a special permit. So you be careful changing that, because you're gonna mess up lots of other zones.
I'm only talking about this for purpose of discussion, to find a way to make the accessory apartment bylaw work without people having to add an AI system when they may not have to. And here, because they're considering it a multifamily house, right? The Board of Health is considering,
Jim,
Yep.
we're sort of straying away from the agenda. here.
Yeah, this is off topic, yeah.
Yeah, so-
Good point.
Good
We're
point,
gonna
but-
have a meeting with the Board of Health
Right.
to discuss this issue.
not soon enough for me.
Okay, but you're onto a whole different direction right
Okay,
now.
I thought we were looking at definitions, and I was trying to fit the definitions here.
Right.
And they say multifamily dwelling is 3 or more. So you can't have it both ways. If a multifamily is 3 or more, but there are only 2 for an accessory apartment, then it can't be a multifamily dwelling.
That's why bringing definitions together like this in one place is a very interesting exercise.
So I think we need to do that, so we can make that happen.
That's part of our discussion, I think, Pam, when we are discussing this for giving comments to our consultants.
I also think we ought to have this in hand when we meet with the Board of Health.
Okay, we're gonna move on, all right?
Absolutely.
Everybody all set? The next thing on the agenda is the Bikeways Extension Letter. Bob, you've been leading,
Yep, and Pat and I have.
Yeah, I did some copies here. Okay, and I've got one we can both look at, Paul, okay? Because what Bob did is he took the basic letter that you have and made a couple of changes here, so. Here are the changes that Bob put in. Here's the basic letter.
What she meant to hear.
We've got the basic letter, okay.
I think you did a great job on this letter.
Yeah. personally, I really like the changes that Bob made.
I do too. You did a great job. Kudos to
Were
you.
those incorporated into,
No,
not yet?
Incorporated into, I'm sorry.
You gave us a letter.
Brian hasn't seen those.
Oh, I haven't seen that. Okay.
Okay.
I'll stand by.
So this is premature then to have this discussion? I mean, this
No.
is what Brian drafted. Why don't we talk about your ideas, give them to Brian, then we'll look at it one more time? Does that work?
No, I don't think we need to.
No?
Because the substance of the letter is the
Same.
same. Bob just added to it and
Right.
beefed it up.
Yeah.
Okay.
What's in bold, because the same subtopics, the same bullet items, and I just added to it or changed some of the words. But
Well, then why don't you just quickly read what you wrote as a, and we can...
Okay, well, this, in section 3, when the Bourne landfill is closed, all solid waste, not only Falmouth, but other Upper Cape communities as well, will have to be trucked over the bridges. This will double, if not triple, the number of large trash hauling trucks on our roads and traversing already aging bridges, which is highlighted in bold, if there is no railway as a first alternative. That reality would lead to increased traffic on already congested roads, especially in the summer, increased road wear, and most importantly, decreased air quality. It will also dramatically increase the cost of solid waste disposal for all of our citizens due to the increased cost involved in trucking solid waste off Cape. We also recognize that train transport is an environmentally sound means of transporting large amounts of materials, as trains can transport more material per gallon of fuel than road vehicles. We also recognize that bicycle transportation is ecologically desirable. However, one ecological mode of transportation should not eliminate another ecological mode of transportation when both can coexist along the same path. Section 4, if travel across the bridges from whatever cause is compromised or becomes limited, the railroad could be our only means of transporting materials both on and off Cape. The railroad bridge is less vulnerable to severe weather than the roadway bridges. So essentially just a few changes, and I added a chunk to number 4. So.
Anybody else have any comments on the language? Yes, Paul?
I particularly like the changes, particularly 4. I was uncomfortable with the word damage. I
Yeah.
think that was much better. But the basic question I have is, this letter is being sent to the Bikeways Committee with a copy to the Board of Selectmen. I'm curious why we don't send it to the Board of Selectmen with a copy to the Bikeways Committee.
It's actually
I mean,
true, 'cause
what's
they're a
prompting
subcommittee
this?
of the
Does the
Board of
Bikeways
Selectmen.
Committee ask for something, or we just,
No, we're just doing it.
if we're doing it, it probably should go to the Board of Selectmen to copy the
I
Bikeways.
think
I'm
you're right.
curious why
Yeah.
that's that way.
Yeah.
Right, because they are a subcommittee of the Board of Selectmen,
Yeah.
right?
I'm fine.
And the other thing I was going to suggest, in the second paragraph, regardless of where it goes, it says, however, the option the Bikeways Committee has been promoting. I'm not sure they've been promoting that activity, and I think if we just took out the phrase, the Bikeway Committee has been promoting, which is, so it just says, however, the option to replace the railroad tracks with the bike path. I
Okay,
mean,
so
there's
you're
really
deleting-
no reason to tie it to them, because the last meeting I
Right.
went to, the Bikeways Committee, they were looking at other options,
Yeah.
and I didn't get the impression that they were sold on that one option.
And it might be a moot point, because we're only commenting on it, and state agencies have expressed an opinion already, so I guess we can make our comments and just let them fall where they may.
But why tie it down to the Bikeways?
I'm fine with that.
Yeah,
I'm
so
fine.
What
you
did
talk
you-
about deleting.
Okay.
Just cross out the phrase.
That's-
Yeah, yeah,
you know.
I'm okay with that. Everybody?
yeah.
By the way, number 4, I said damage to the bridge, but I think yours is more elegant,
Mm.
and I would switch this.
Well, we talked about that in the local comprehensive plan,
Yeah.
about how important the connection, the intermodal rail, and especially dealing with even any kind of disaster, or to have that available to us was important.
And we have someone right here with firsthand experience with Katrina, where road bridges were compromised and couldn't be traversed. So I don't think that's a far reach.
I'd like
I
to
don't think so
see
either.
copies also go to our state representatives, because it is the state that is going to have to make the decision.
Yeah.
as to whether the railroad is going to be abandoned or not. So I think it should go to both of the state representatives.
Doesn't
Is
the-
that our job or the selectmen's job to forward that?
I think because we've got carbon copies going, I think we can send it to them.
Is that the proper protocol, Brian?
Sure, you're an elected board.
Okay, fine. I just want to follow protocol, that's all.
Nobody uses carbon copies anymore.
Right.
Or Xerox, so I was going to say.
Yeah.
So,
Bob, I hadn't heard anyone use that term in a while.
I remember that time.
Zero.
I do too.
Or the mimeograph, how-
Oh, yeah. All those good things.
I thought you were younger.
I did it in junior high.
Same age,
that's
you old guy, you.
I used to,
I actually think inserting something about the
hold it, go ahead.
I also think
Don't put
including
that in
something
the
about the
minutes.
transport of emergency personnel, because that may be the only way emergency personnel can be transported is via train. Katrina, it was mostly barges. So we went across the Mississippi with the cows and the emergency responders, the cows and us. So I mean,
Well, I think the point's been made, but we might be piling on at this point. We're saying, don't take it out.
So what you'd say is of transporting materials and personnel.
on emergency personnel. And it's up to you, but.
I'm fine with whatever language you guys are comfortable with. Okay?
Yep.
Okay.
So you just need to make some changes. This is going to go to the Board of Selectmen. So the Falmouth Planning Board has always been supportive and remains so in regards to the Bikeways Committee's goals and initiatives. Their efforts are encouraged in the local comprehensive plan. So those changes have to be
Okay.
edited in, so they're the third person.
I have one other question.
I'll make those for you if you just send us a copy.
Doesn't the DOT also have input into the use or turning into disuse of rail lines?
Right, the manager of rails is part of the Department of Transportation, is that, that whole division has to sign off on what happens and the, for the rails, as well
Right.
as the federal folks
Then
too.
you gotta change it.
Right, so I think sending it to the state reps or whatever, you know, DOT is gonna be the final sign off, I think.
But they vote the budget.
Yeah, send everything.
Right.
I guess.
Okay, we're gonna move on.
Then I need the other.
So you
Ready?
Brian, I can make the changes and
Okay.
forward it to you.
That's fine, you need a vote.
Okay. We need to vote on these changes. A motion to approve?
So move.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
A motion to send it to the board, or?
Motion to send it to the select board?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Very good.
Very good.
Transfer of development rights bylaw.
So you have the basic structure. You have the little acorn from which will grow the mighty oak. But it essentially strips it down to the barest bones. Your purpose, your donor areas, your receiving areas, and some criteria. But again, the purpose is essentially to allow people to sell their rights, whether it's within a district or intra or inter-districts. So take a look at that. And is that something, if I have a piece of property on this corner of the street and I want to send it 2 blocks down to another piece of property, that's what this envisions. Or if I want to send it from Wacoit to Quissit, that's also in the vision. So, that way, if I have a piece of property and I'm in an ACEC in Wacoit, and I just want to bump it up to another elevation to the subdivision literally, minutes away, that's what this can do. Right. Even though it's within a district. So donor areas, we're looking at V and E zones, NAE zones. wellhead protection areas. And what I've tried to do is get away from our local bylaw and just make them DEP Zone 2s. So I think we need to visit eventually someday the 50-year travel times that we have. We did that for Fresh Pond Block a couple of years ago when Scoba Rhodes wrote his petition. And we did say we were going to come back and take a look at the other. We have some areas that are not regulated that are in DEP Zone 2s. And some places that are no longer in Zone 2s that were still in our local bylaw, watersheds. So we need to revisit that. So I didn't put it in there. I got away from coastal pond overlay a little bit and said, we had this discussion years and years and years ago, and I think a commenter brought it forward not so recently, is that DEP has recharge zones to nitrogen-sensitive embayments. So it captures, if you're in a nitrogen-sensitive embayment recharge area, it captures everybody, not just subdivisions of 5 acres or 5 lots or site plan reviews or whatever. Something to start thinking about. If what we're trying to do is protect the resource, then you need to be able to be protecting the resource. In the receiving areas, I started looking into the future a little bit because we're talking about this. Village centers, business redevelopment. And if I have a plan of residential development, a PRD somewhere, and the example is the Ballymede example we just had, can I transfer in some development rights? I'm just in a PRD, and I've got a piece of open space over by Spectacle Pond. We need to be able to sort of cure that. We sort of finessed that. This would be, you'll be able to do it. So, and the criteria, again, 240, 216, you know, is it inadequate, is it suitable? Are there provisions? Because we don't have a bank. Banks, we don't have the administrative infrastructure here in town to do that.
We would need a redevelopment authority to do that.
Right. You would need.
That's a major structural change.
Right, right. So right now, we just accept, you know, conservation restrictions. It wouldn't be a covenant. Covenants, 30 years can kind of go away. Or the property is actually turned over to like a 300 committee or something like that. So those are the basic conceptual framework here. Take a look at it, mark it up, add your notes, send your comments to Melinda. I'll lose them. My inbox is ridiculous. And that way we can start building on, is the purpose okay? But if the purpose is okay, then donors and receiving areas are next. You know, where do they go? And then the special permit criteria is how do we do it? But we really want to do it. Why are we doing this? Where are we going to do it? And how are we going to do it? That's usually the sequence of events.
So, and this is all by special permit.
It has to be.
So, you're right, so 240, 216 is the game plan that we have to play by.
State, right now, 40A says has to be a special permit.
Okay. And that's, so the special permanent granting authority will be the ZBA.
No, could be you.
We,
Could be you.
okay,
Could be both.
could be either or.
Either or. But usually, you know, it's this type of activity is the planning board.
Okay.
Right. But think about it. I don't need answers tonight. I just like you to start.
No, it seems to be
Homework.
pretty clean with what I was thinking. How about you, Pat? You and I, Bob, have talked about this.
It is, but one of the things that is encompassed, but not specifically so, is that by transfer development rights, we are putting greater density into particular areas too.
And less density in others. It should be neutral.
But I'm wondering if we can transfer development rights, if we just are looking at districts, or if we can make some kind of a mention also, particularly Seward areas that can take greater density. I don't know if that can be done or not.
Well, that's your homework. So I want you, I think you all have an electronic version of this.
Yeah.
Start adding your thoughts, just like that, Pat. you know, what's the quid pro quo? The special, you're talking special permit criteria.
Yeah,
And section 216 says, you know, the site is adequate and suitable. Well, you're thinking more along the lines of adding some criteria. How is it adequate, how is it suitable? Well, it's
Yeah.
on the sewer.
because we're increasing density.
So that's your homework. That's everybody's homework, is to start thinking about what the criteria you're going to want to see as a planning board, a special permit granting authority, to make this work. Okay, and there's no answer tonight. It's, you know, your creativity, and then we'll flush it out over time.
Paul?
I'm just curious if a deed restriction is necessary.
Yes. I would think so, yes. Otherwise,
You end up with both.
Yeah.
you may transfer someone's rights, but you want something on record of the registry of deeds, you know, that any title examiner is going to see, oh, there's a conservation restriction, cannot be developed. Until such time as you get a bank, so along those lines, yeah, you're looking at a deed restriction, conservation restriction.
In this context, Brian, the next time we talk about it, we've only touched on it, but I remember it came up in the local comprehensive plan about the agreement that we did for the financing of our sewers that, you know, it's supposed to be growth neutral,
Flow neutral.
flow neutral.
Flow neutral.
Flow neutral. Okay, that's the proper terminology. I would like to revisit that. I don't really, I think I understand it, but I'd like to, as a board, I think we should talk about that a little bit, because we've already committed to that, is that correct?
Yeah, there's enough flow in certain areas, and plus the background growth, they just didn't have, you know, the X number. You have some built-in surplus, right?
My understanding is when they did that, they say, oh, here's the gross potential that you could do in the whole town, and we can't exceed that.
Right, and you may want to have a bank, a sewer bank. We talked about that with the Board of Health, that you can actually, you know, allocate credits. Other towns do this.
Bourne,
Yeah.
I'm dealing with it in Bourne like crazy.
Right, right.
In Bourne, it actually has had a negative effect, though. They did a growth incentive zone to do Buzzards Bay and build the whole thing up. They didn't deal with the sewer, and so the whole thing's been starving. Nothing's happening at all because of the sewer aspect of it. So they had this whole thing, get all excited about it, it goes nowhere. So, because it wasn't thought out.
Right, so you need to have a bank of credits, both in terms of how you're going to develop it and what the criteria, the infrastructure that's there. You know, we're going to need so many credits for the sewer bank.
I think in that case, the wastewater allocation was given out, and the people had never developed it. So when somebody else came in, there was no other capability.
Right.
But there probably should have been some kind of limit on development. If you want the capability, you should do it within the time frame. And that might
People
have
went
helped.
out, I'm dealing with it, people went out, grabbed it all up, I've got an approved plan that did nothing to it, and they're sitting on, so you got individuals that are sitting on it, and they're controlling the whole future of their village, and they're not doing anything at all.
That's my point, it should be a time
No,
frame.
that needs to be done carefully, because we can learn from the towns around us.
It's done throughout the country.
Right.
And if you're in the same resource district, if I'm in a Phase 1 sewer district, and I'm just transferring credits within that district, it's a wash.
Right.
Because it's why am I bring a pipe out to here? When I build that, I can just increase the density here and make that open space. So intra-zone transfers are actually easier because it's a wash. So think about that. Think about the
Some
criteria.
more homework here.
This is your homework, yeah. From where to where, why, where, how.
John?
Brian,
Yeah.
do you have maps that will show us where the DEP recharge area is?
Yes.
And the areas of critical environment?
I-
What is the SOC? I don't understand what that means.
Massachusetts Secretary of the Commonwealth. I didn't want to write it out.
Okay, Secretary of the Commonwealth has areas of critical environmental.
It would have gone off the page.
Brian,
Okay.
when we do this, I don't know if it's possible, but I've always wanted to have the show with the Falmouth GIS. Somebody asked that question, you could click on it, be on the screen, and everyone could see it.
All these are on the Times GIS.
Yes, I'm familiar with them, but I mean, it would be good for, when we're having this discussion and we're talking about it, you could click on it and then you just click on the code and it changes and everyone sees it right away.
Well, the technology's on the way, I'm told.
Right.
Right.
So let's try to use it.
Sure,
If-
agree.
If we can, because
Amen.
I think, for John's question, if we were all set up to do that, it'd be touch of a button and we'd all see it in a second.
Yeah,
And
it's,
so would the people at home.
And so the people at home is what's more important. I use the GIS every day, I mean, 5 times a day, I use it all the time in my business, but if you all could, it's a good tool if you could get familiar with it, it's really powerful,
With the GIS,
yeah.
I used it constantly.
But for our town
Okay,
here, you
yeah.
know, yeah, it's,
Secretary of the Commonwealth, is that different than Secretary of State?
that's the actual designation, Secretary of the Commonwealth. They're a Commonwealth, not a state.
So, since this is the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, which is the state of Massachusetts, are there two separate people?
No, it's the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Secretary of the Commonwealth is the actual designation. I know because we have to make reports to the Secretary of the Commonwealth's Corporations Division or this division or Lobbyist Division. So it's the SOC, Secretary of the Commonwealth.
Oh,
Learn
learn
something
something
new every
new
day.
every day?
Yeah.
Unbelievable. Fabulous.
There's a Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, Commonwealth of Virginia.
Right.
That's their title. But it's just an area of critical, the only one we have is Quaque Bay, is a ACEC.
okay. Ready to move on?
So I'd like to visit this again in a month.
Okay.
Okay. I want to keep the ball rolling here. So if you can get comments to us in a couple of weeks, I can work on it, bring it back by mid-September.
I don't see any general correspondence file.
Neither do I.
Okay.
Glad you checked.
Future agenda items. I have one to suggest. I don't know if it's, I got the proper terminology, but I know that in Woods Hole, I believe it's Church Street, is it Church Street or School? It's Church Street, has a special designation of the street itself, that as the planning board, when people wanted to make changes to it, we had to chime in on it. Remember the moving the stone walls?
It's a scenic road.
Scenic road. I would like to consider Mill Road a scenic road, and I would like to start the process of the public outreach and talk about it, because I just think it needs the same protection, but it's a long process, and it has to be open discussion and public hearings and everything. I'm not, but I would like to talk about if we could do another road.
Okay, it's not on the list?
I don't believe it is.
Well, I'll take a look, okay.
And there may be others.
There may be others, I just happen to pick one because I traverse it every day.
Okay.
It's a
Elm Road.
beautiful, beautiful.
Elm Road is very similar.
Right, it is.
There, I couldn't make an argument to be different, so
And if you're
maybe,
gonna do one, you might as well do both.
well, we should have that discussion, is what I'm saying. It should be an open, public discussion.
We have a
Take a
list
look.
of what is already.
Right.
Started from there.
Yes, so let's review the current list
Sure.
and see if anything should be added to it.
Okay.
And anytime it can fit in, Brian. We have a lot of important things on our agenda, but just,
I'll just email the list to the board, so you'll have it, and we'll get it on I'll put it on my list of things to do.
things to do, yep.
Okay.
Put it on the whiteboard there, and,
My base camp,
yep.
and I put it on my list of things to do.
Anybody else, a new agenda item?
I have a question, because our next meeting is the 29th, but the 24th is the stakeholders meeting, I think. Is that arranged and ongoing for the plaza, or am I wrong on all of that?
A letter has been sent out to them where it's going to be meeting at the Herman Room.
Right?
Yep.
Have you gotten acceptances, so we know?
I don't think we've gotten any replies yet, I don't know.
I don't know. I can find out.
I know I asked for the list because I was going to try to do telephone call-ups and just see, and I haven't done that yet, but it's kind of confusing because the landowner's name isn't a person most of the time, it's a corporation. So who do you call? So you have to do so much research to make a phone call, I'm not sure I have the time to do that.
That's for the-
It'd be good if in the future, we could get I don't know if it's appropriate or not, but to have a faster means of contacting in this high-tech world here. The snail mail is kind of slow.
Yeah, I agree.
We could text, if we had a text address or something for, and maybe that's another whole change. Do we require every property owner to provide an electronic means of communication? That would speed up the world if we did that.
Not everybody has, but something we can take a look at for
Well,
it.
my-
Business owners do.
My question is just being generated because this has to do with our board here. And I didn't know whether it was happening or not, whether any replies had been received.
The answer, I don't know.
You don't know, okay.
We don't know, but I will double down on it and have something for next week.
Okay.
I will post a planning board meeting for the 24th, so that if a quorum is there, you're fine.
Yes.
Okay.
So actually, your next meeting is actually August 24th at the Herman Thursday.
Okay.
Okay.
At what time? 7?
I'll find out. I think it's earlier. I think it's 6:30.
I think it should be
6:30?
6:30.
Right. So actually, your next meeting is August 24th. I'll post it, so that if you want to go, you can go as a quorum. And then you will be meeting the 29th. You have a busy agenda for the 29th.
So,
Just-
John, did you get the letter?
I did.
Okay. He's a stakeholder, that's why.
Actually,
Right.
just so you know, actually, the only Tuesday off you'll have for a while is September 5th. That's the Labor Day weekend.
Yeah.
And then you're going to be meeting pretty regularly after that.
Did they respond?
It all goes to the planning office, not to me. Well, I don't see anything else on the agenda.
I move adjournment.
I'll second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. This is a very ambitious